Well, hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another virtual event from the Norwich Bookstore. My name is Sam. If you shop in our store frequently, you might recognize me from behind the counter or running around throughout the store. But if you're new here, welcome. It's great to meet you. And wherever you're joining us from this evening, we're really glad to have you. The Norwich Bookstore is an independent bookstore. We've been here since 1994 here in Norwich, Vermont, in the Upper Valley of the Vermont, New Hampshire area. And if you're from here, again, we thank you for your support and for tuning in this evening. And if you're from far away, we're so glad that you found us and hope you enjoy. Now, tonight, we are here for a very important book, a very exciting book, and one that I can't wait to hear more about. And this is your reminder now that we are here, first and foremost, to celebrate a book this evening. The book is Prosperity in the Fossil-Free Economy. It is out from Yale University Press, and we do have copies on our shelves here at the Norwich Bookstore. Now, your book purchase is what keeps us going. It is what keeps our doors open and our lights on. It is what keeps us able to do these kinds of author events. And it is also what supports the work and the research of authors like Melissa K Scanlan. So tonight, if you enjoy what you hear, if you want to know more, don't be shy. I'm going to post links in the chat, and I hope that you'll consider picking up a copy or two, because, you know, the holidays are coming, and books make great gifts. But pick up a copy of Prosperity in the Fossil-Free Economy, and we hope that you will read it and learn from it and hopefully implement some of the ideas that Melissa is talking about tonight down the road. And we are very excited, again, to be supporting this book. And I'm also going to post links in the chat to Gus Speth's book, They Knew, which came out earlier this year from MIT Press. And another wonderful read. Many of you have picked it up already. And if you haven't, I hope that you will consider doing so tonight. Thank you very much. Now, this evening, we are going to be taking questions at the end of the discussion. If you have questions, and we always get great questions at these events, you can put them in the chat, or you can drop them into the Q&A module. That's at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A. I'll be looking at that. We'll get to as many questions as we are able to in our time this evening. So keep them coming. We really appreciate your questions, and thank you so much. We do many author events here at the Norwich Bookstore. Right now, they are all online, but we try to keep up a schedule of 2 or 3 author events a week during our busiest season. If there is something else that you enjoy, you might want to look at our schedule. We might just have an author who you're dying to see coming up. NorwichBookstore.com is the place to find our events calendar, or you can follow us on social media. You can sign up for our email newsletter. We send a weekly newsletter. And no matter where you're joining us from, we hope to see you back here at these virtual events. And we thank you again for your support. And now, without further ado, I am honored and delighted to welcome 2 really wonderful speakers tonight, and I am thrilled to be hearing the conversation between them. I think you all will be as well. Tonight we're here with Melissa K Scanlan. Melissa K Scanlan is the Lined BU Line Endowed Chair and Professor of Water Policy and Director of the Center for Water Policy at the School of Freshwater Sciences, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She's affiliated faculty at the UW Law School, and she's the former Associate Dean of Environmental Programs and Professor at the Vermont Law School. And Melissa wrote parts of this book, Prosperity in the Fossil-Free Economy, right here in the Upper Valley in Norwich, Vermont. Tonight, Melissa is joined in conversation with Gus Speth. Gus Speth served as member and chairman of the U.S. Council on Environmental Quality during the Carter administration. And from 1993 to 1999, he was administrator of the United Nations Development Program and served as chair of the UN Development Group. A retired professor of law and senior fellow at the Vermont Law School, he's also taught at Georgetown and at Yale. He's founder of the World Resources Institute and a co-founder of the Natural Resources Defense Council. And his recent book was They Knew, the US government's 50-year role in causing the climate crisis, which was out earlier this year from MIT Press. Wherever you're joining us from tonight, please join me in giving a warm Upper Valley welcome to Gus Speth and to Melissa K Scanlan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I must say, this is an honor for me to be moderating, if you will, this session on Melissa's great book. Melissa was my dean at the environments at the law school in the environment program there. And we created programs together. We taught together. And I have a great affection for her and a great admiration for her accomplishments, including most recently this wonderful book. So hello, Melissa, how are you?
Hi, great to be here. And this is an honor to be in conversation with you too, because teaching that class together, New Frontiers in Environmental Law, kind of set me on the trajectory that led to writing this book. So it's now good to come back and have the conversation with you.
Well, that's great for me too. And your current role in Wisconsin is focused on water and water issues and water law and water policy, and that's been a specialty of yours for a long, long time. But it's interesting that you focus your new book around building a fossil-free economy. And we'll talk in a minute about a key ingredient of that, the cooperative, and what's possible there. But how did you come to use this fossil-free economy prosperity in the fossil-free economy as a sort of framing mechanism for the book?
Well, I think that climate change is the biggest defining issue that we have. And yes, I'm focused on water, and climate change is intensifying so many different aspects of the water system, from drought to sea level rise to severe storms and flooding. So according to the latest that we got out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which their report came out in August of 2021, we're already seeing major alterations in natural global systems that are underway because of human behavior. And we know that carbon dioxide's at its highest level in over 800,000 years and rising. And greenhouse gases caused by humans are responsible for 1.1 degree Celsius increase in temperatures since 1850. That is it sounds so small, right? And yet, look at what we're experiencing today. Climate change is not some far off thing. In the summer of 2021 alone, it's incredible. Hurricane Ida, the Dixie Fire in California, the heat waves in the Pacific Northwest. And that's just looking at the US, not even accounting for what happened in Germany with flooding and China with flooding and other places. So sadly, we've waited so long to take action. As you know and have documented in your book, They Knew, that some of these changes have been set in motion and can't even be stopped, only slowed. So over the next 20 years, the sea is going to continue to rise. We will continue to feel hotter temperatures where we live and work. If you ski at Killington, you'll still probably be able to ski, but it's going to be on snow that's made in order to accommodate for the change in temperatures. Still, we can avoid the worst case scenarios of extreme suffering if we stop burning fossil fuels and reduce greenhouse gases to zero as soon as possible. So here comes the framing of moving forward to the fossil-free economy. Action in this decade is critical. And that means huge ripple effects across the entire global economy, which is why I framed the book as offering a business design to get us to that next economy, which needs to be fossil-free. We're just coming up on the end of the COP. It's dragging on for a few more days, apparently. And I think it's a reminder that the failure of government to take decisive action has been undermining our future on the planet. I started writing this book when Trump was in office, so then the focus on the private sector was really obvious because we couldn't do anything with the federal government in the US, but it's still so relevant today. The Biden administration is the first to have a clear vision and goal for moving off of fossil fuels But so far, he can't get enough support in Congress to do anything decisive. And I think people are frustrated with the inability of government to take steps to prioritize environmental sustainability. So that's why I wanted to look at business design, Gus, and the private sector in particular, which can affect change more quickly when the government is dragging its feet.
Well, they're certainly doing that, and it appears that they've done a lot of that in Glasgow, I'm sad to say, but as you mentioned. So we need a new business sector, one that's nimble and committed to dealing with the climate issue. Um, One area you focus on in the book, really the main area, is the possibility of building up the cooperative sector, co-ops. Most of us, as a big part of the solution and as a main alternative to, investor-owned businesses. So this is very intriguing to me. A lot of us around this area think of the co-op as a place where you can buy your groceries. But I think probably it's not well appreciated how extraordinary this area is. So tell us a little bit how you got there, and what some of your thoughts are about building a sustainable business sector.
Sure. So I think reimagining how the world does business to produce broadly shared wealth can allow us to prosper while we transform to this new economy. That really needs to be a more democratic economy too. And I guess first, I should say that when I say the term sustainability, I mean triple bottom line sustainability. So a business that would produce not only financial results if they're a for-profit, but environmental and social results as well. And a shared way of defining this is by using the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as a benchmark to compare business activity. So these are the goals that were unanimously adopted by all members of the United Nations to be achieved by 2030. They include things like ending poverty and hunger, reducing wealth inequality, in addition to climate change and other social and environmental goals. One thing that led me to search for alternatives to the dominant investor-owned corporation form was seeing that sustainability reporting is the norm for the vast majority of investor-owned corporations. And the most commonly used way to do this is through the Global Reporting Initiative, and their very own self-assessment in 2015 showed a major disconnect. This reporting norm amongst investor-owned corporations wasn't resulting in better outcomes for the environment or society. And they said this was because reporting on sustainability wasn't reforming the business model, that was the root of the problem. So what is this new business model we need? I started asking about this. What we need is not more of the same, but more democratic enterprises. And what I mean by that is enterprises that are of, by, and for the people, that are enterprises designed to have more owners, to be built around democratic governance principles where one worker gets one vote, where sustainability and deep decarbonization are part of the core business, core purpose of the business, and the businesses are designed to improve the communities where they are working and sharing prosperity. And cooperatives are the oldest form of business that has been designed to do this. We have newer certifications that are out there, but cooperatives have been around for hundreds of years. And so I thought that was going to be the most interesting form to look at, because they can be for profit or not for profit. They are designed to have a purpose based on ethics, values, and principles. And these are internationally defined. So you can find cooperatives in almost every country of the world, in almost every economic sector. And there's a common set of ethics, values, and principles that cooperatives can be designed around. And because they are values driven, and one shared principle is concern for the community, which they articulate as sustainable economic development, they have a tremendous potential to fundamentally alter how we do business. So that's a little bit more about co-ops. You mentioned people being familiar with them in the Upper Valley for their food. The Hanover Co-op is one that I was a member of when I lived there too. So yes, that one's definitely well known. I think people know a little bit less about the fact that co-ops were critical for bringing electricity to rural America during the New Deal era, and water as well to rural America. So at a time when about 10% of the farms across America had electricity, and the major utilities wouldn't go into rural America even when given incentives from the federal government, we had New Deal legislation and executive actions that really promoted farmer-controlled co-ops across the rural United States. And that's what brought electricity, which led to the economic development that happened after the electricity across the US.
Interesting. I want to get to, I mean, you've really developed into one of the top experts on co-ops internationally with the publication of this book. And I know a lot of it has to do with your book focuses on some very compelling and carefully drafted case studies of co-ops here and in Europe. And I know you spent some time in Spain doing research for the book. Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, I was living in Vermont at the time, so the prospect of sunshine and the Mediterranean Sea, wine, olives, I mean, what more could draw me there, right? But seriously, Spain has a strong worker co-op sector and has been a leader in the law on environmental and social equity pursuits. So I was really intrigued by going to this location. It has a provision in its national constitution that promotes worker-owned cooperatives, and they have national laws that they created after the financial crisis of 2008 and beyond, which hit Spain really hard, to promote what they call the social economy. Instead of a Department of Commerce, they have departments of social economy, and they advance co-ops, nonprofits, foundations, fishing guilds, and the like. And of course, Spain is also home to the largest worker-owned co-op in the world, the Mondragon Cooperative. So people who are really interested in this sector like to go to Spain to study Mondragon. So everyone assumes that's what I did too. And I didn't. I went to Spain to understand the next generation of cooperatives. I call them the second generation, who were inspired by Mondragon. And I focused on the community of Valencia in Catalonia, where in Valencia, the community of Valencia, there are more worker-owned cooperatives in just that community than the entire United States. So they're obviously doing something right in terms of having this model proliferate. So maybe I'll give you just a quick example. One of the sustainability pathbreakers I found in Spain that I feature in the book is called Som Energia. And this was Spain's first national renewable energy co-op. We don't have anything like this in the US, where you have a co-op that's spread across the country promoting renewable energy. In Spain, this started about 10 years ago, and it's grown tremendously. It now has over 70,000 members powering their homes with renewables. And a hallmark of this co-op is that it combines local groups and national organizations to bring people together. So it is really focused on democratic engagement. If they operated in the United States, they would have a Norwich local group. Where people met in person, right? And they meet in small local groups, allowing members to get to know each other, share information about how to conserve energy, how to really shrink their electric bills and carbon footprint. And people often ask, how do co-ops get capital? without participating in the stock market. So Som Energia was able to capitalize projects with local member investments. So their investors are their members who use their services. So they have this tight knit between the investors and the members. They are one and the same. And they weren't having to go to the banks for loans to finance these investments in renewables. So I think they present a really interesting model for how to move forward quickly by creating a platform for participation amongst people who are really eager to be part of the renewables revolution.
Fascinating. Now, you've mentioned a couple of types of co-ops, worker-owned co-ops, and I guess the large and famous Mondragon co-op in Spain and the Basque area is worker-owned. We talked about the co-op food store, and that's consumer-owned, and they're also producer-owned, which I think maybe Cabot cheese is. So do you have a favorite, so to speak? Do you think one of these models performs better than the others in the co-op world, or is there a big space for all three?
I think there's a big space for all three. I think the most important thing is what distinguishes the path breakers that I found is that they have a very clear, defined sustainability purpose, and they write that into their articles of incorporation and their bylaws that influences their day-to-day operations. So, and the purpose is usually grounded really clearly in the internationally shared principles of co-ops. So it's that clarity of purpose that I think helps allow them to move forward ahead of the law, regardless of whether they're farmer, producer owned, or worker owned, or consumer owned. I did see some hybrid co-ops in Spain that I thought were really interesting, where there's a co-op bank that I write about in the book that has both worker members and other cooperatives that are part of this bank. And I thought that was an interesting way of creating a hybrid. But I don't think any one type is necessary. I think the most important thing is having a very clear purpose that's organized around sustainability, and that's written into their legal documents.
Well, this is where your legal background and your being a lawyer, I think, comes into your book in a big way, because you look at the bylaws and the articles and other rules and not only that may have been created at the national level, but at the co-op level themselves. And so are there things, for example, that government at different levels can do to promote and sustain the co-op business?
Oh, definitely. I think the law in Spain is really a fantastic model, because they have a federal level law that then gives direction, but also freedom to the autonomous communities. And that is a model that we could use in the US as well, where we have a federal law where we have states then that are implementing it. And having government involved in providing technical support and financial support to cooperatives, I think, is really helpful. Spain has been able to do a lot more with that kind of supportive ecosystem. It's not necessary to have that in place in order to have cooperatives flourishing, but it definitely it moves this model a lot further, a lot faster.
And you did find the olives and the Spanish wines and the beach and other things, I'm sure, when you were there as well.
Yes, the first co-op I visited was a farmer-owned winery that produced organic grapes.
So how And you've concluded, I think, that with enough support from government and outside of government, that this sector could grow quite substantially to the point that it became a major alternative um, to the investor-owned corporation model.
I have. And I also think that it's a bipartisan kind of thing. Um, and I'll just say a little bit more about that, because that is, I mean, when you look at the inability to move forward on our climate plans in the US, it's so partisan. We need to figure out ways around that gridlock, right? So this, I want to emphasize here the common good and how that can be a way of promoting a bipartisan solution. The Mondragon Co-op is famous for its deep commitment to building community ownership, and it helps the Boss community reduce unemployment and poverty. And that aspect of co-ops, that concern for the community, is really powerful, especially when the community is under stress, and as so many are now. And we're going to be facing even bigger stressors with climate disruptions as that accelerates. So Vermont used to be home to many mills, not so much anymore. Where I live now, my new home in Wisconsin, we still do have factories. Last year, the investor-owned Verso Corporation closed the paper mill in a town called Wisconsin Rapids. That was the largest employer in that town, so it was just devastating. The ripple effects through the economy were huge, and there's now a push to reopen the paper mill as consolidated cooperative, with mill workers, Northwoods loggers, and industry allies as member owners. And this is supported by Republicans that represent that area and Democrats. And they're, getting some state money to help the newly formed cooperative repurchase this mill. It would be a loan, in the form of a loan that has to be repaid. But I think it's really quite interesting that something like that attracts bipartisan support, because it hits that common thread of commitment to the community. And why commitment to the community is so important, I think, is that when there's a downturn, you don't just close the mill and move to another location where it's cheaper because you're paying workers less and you're polluting the air and water more. With the co-op model, the member owners are going to be committed to the community, and they're all going to have to work together to tighten their belts, so to speak, to get through hard times. And I think that kind of common value is helpful when we want to think about how to find common ground across political parties.
Fascinating. I'm familiar with a co-op in Cleveland, which is inner city owned by residents, and they are, among other things, growing lettuce hydroponically for locals. They have a laundry business, a large laundry business, and nation arm. And this strikes me as fascinating. And did you happen to encounter these folks?
You're talking about the Evergreen co-ops, right?
Yeah.
They're really interesting because they have anchor institutions. Those are the institutions that are not going anywhere. So the universities, the government entities that are in Cleveland, the healthcare industry, the hospitals, Cleveland Clinic. Those are the built-in customer base for these co-ops. So it's a really interesting business model. And I think a lot more can be done around that model of having these anchor institutions. Think about procurement and how their choices about what businesses to purchase from can have these positive ripple effects if they're supporting worker co-ops.
Right. we're at the point where a lot of businesses that were started up by boomers, and those are the folks that are a little younger than I am, and are retiring. So we're having this wave of boomer boss retirements. There is, I think one possibility here, I'd like you to hear your thoughts on it, is to, convert these to worker-owned enterprises. What do you think?
Absolutely. There are 2.3 million businesses in this country that are owned by these, baby boomers who are nearing retirement. So collectively, they employ 25 million people.
Wow.
This is a huge opportunity to educate those business owners. I mean, get this book to as many readers as possible, please. Madison's co-op program specifically does outreach to manufacturing business owners to invite them to learn about converting to worker-owned co-ops. And there are federal tax benefits for business owners like that to convert to a worker-owned structure as they retire. So mission-driven boomers could preserve their vision for the company they built by converting it in this way. And you see a little variation on this theme with Norwich's employee-owned King Arthur Flour, right? So, and that was a transition plan as well to employee-owned.
Right. And Gardner's Supply over in Burlington.
Right.
I think there's some notable barriers to progress in this area that should be dealt with in some way. There's some real sort of big things that are preventing this takeoff that we need.
Yeah, so I can talk about that a little bit. One of those barriers is educational. How many business schools are teaching future leaders about cooperatives and sustainability, right? So how many classes are instead geared towards investor-owned businesses? Law school, how many law schools are teaching social enterprise law and educating lawyers about the importance of legal design of the business so lawyers can work hand in hand with businesses to put their core sustainability purpose into the DNA of the business structure? We don't really teach much about how to do that with articles of incorporation, bylaws, corporate governance that shape day-to-day activities. I didn't learn any of that in law school. And co-ops can reduce the cost of almost any service or product because they aren't singularly focused on earning quarterly profits to satisfy shareholders. They can pursue triple bottom line goals of delivering results ahead of the law. So they can rapidly move off of fossil fuels even when the law fails to require this. It would be much better, of course, if governments prioritize those things. If we had governments prioritizing converting existing privately held businesses to worker-owned co-ops and supporting this emergence. And what I mean by that is, let's look at the Build Back Better plan. Where is there any focus on democratic cooperative enterprises in that plan? It's not really there. Co-ops should be central in federal policy discussions right now about investing in the clean energy transition. So there's been a little bit of activity at the federal level around small business loans, which is great. But what we really need is a federal effort like that, which pulled us out of the Great Depression, that prioritized co-ops as the leading entity to electrify rural America. That's the level of focus we need right now on the renewables revolution to move us forward.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, and then I think we should turn the conversation over to people who've been asking questions online. You've mentioned a couple of times these international principles, co-op principles, and I don't think a lot of people are familiar with that, and I think that seems to be the guardrail, so to speak, that keeps even co-ops aimed in the right direction if they adopt these principles and adhere to them. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I go into this in depth in the book too. The 7 principles that are shared internationally for co-ops, and then there is another set of values. And there's a lot written about this. The principle 7 is the concern for the community, which the international entity that supports co-ops has written extensively about the tying that to environmental sustainability, as well as protecting employees and making sure that they're putting money back into the communities where they're operating through charitable donations. So the principles are, I think, that a grounding for co-ops. They include things like promoting democratic governance. They also include supporting other cooperatives. So you often see co-ops setting up small funds of money to support cooperative education and enhancing people's knowledge about this sector. In fact, the Hanover Co-op gave me a small grant to conduct this research in Spain. So that's part of that supporting cooperative education piece. They're carrying out that principle.
Excellent. Well, it'd be nice to have the business sector supporting democracy rather than trying to buy it. So that's another benefit of movement in this direction. Sam,
I think that just on that point, Gus, that co-ops can be such a great kind of classroom for democratic engagement and learning how to participate in the workplace, and actually participating in the workplace is going to then have spillover effects in how we participate in the political democracy in which we live, right? And conversely, if we think that we don't have a voice in our workplace and we don't actually practice a democratic participation in the stuff that we do every day in our workplace, why do we think that people are going to know how to participate politically? You know, these things can go hand in hand and really build a more robust system of engagement.
Well, democracy needs an infrastructure, right? And the co-ops and the right kinds of enterprises can be a big part of that infrastructure. And Sam, I see you have reappeared on my screen. Are you getting some interesting questions and comments from Melissa from the audience?
Indeed, I have reappeared, and I have reappeared with questions, and thank you both so much. Great conversation. And one that clearly folks are enjoying and thinking about, judging by the questions we've got here. If you've got a question, you can drop it into the chat or into our Q&A box, which again is at the bottom of your screen. And we've got a few minutes for questions, so we can get to as many as we can. So if you've got one, throw it on in there. First question this evening comes from Harrison, going back to Som Energia, the cooperative you were discussing earlier in Spain. Harrison says Som Energia sounds like a remarkable example of how a co-op can help move ahead to a fossil-free economy. Is there any organization in the US studying how the example of a cooperative like this could be developed here, besides you, Professor Scanlan?
I don't know that. I don't know if there's an entity studying how co-ops can be leaders in renewable energy besides the work that I was doing. I didn't find other books on this, for instance, and I didn't find any organizations. I mean, there's definitely, we have many hundreds of electric co-ops across the US. and of course, there's a federation that they all feed into. But they're not. That federation's not really focused on renewables. So this is an area where, if you have an interest in it, you could be the one who fills that void. Please fill that void, because the electric co-ops in the US have some of the dirtiest electricity when it comes to greenhouse gases per units of electricity produced, which also means that we could make great progress with that sector. Most of the investments in coal burning utilities that the US electric co-ops have made are in facilities that are nearing retirement. So this is the perfect time to get involved in pushing renewables across that sector, because the business case is strong for it. One of the examples that I give is a US electric co-op, Cobb Electric in Georgia. And I think that's an interesting case study for us to look at, because Georgia doesn't have any laws that promote renewable energy. They don't have any kind of climate goals in their state law. And yet in 2019, Georgia was where most of the solar co-ops most of the solar that co-ops are using is installed in Georgia. And Cobb Electric led that push and has been a major leader in distributing solar power. So the message of their story, I think, is that the private sector in co-ops can still move forward, even when the laws aren't really aligned to push for solar. And for anyone who's interested in this area, I think the field is wide open to take the inspiration of a story like Som Energia and try to replicate it in the US.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of questions here about sustainable agriculture, cooperative agriculture, and specifically dairy farming, which is something that has been in the conversation a lot recently here. David asks, how could farmers adapt current cooperative models to provide shared food and farm infrastructure that addresses the challenges of current approaches? For instance, current dairy co-ops can end up being part of a system that encourages overproduction and then relies on imported fertilizer, fossil fuels, and pesticides. How could co-ops be adapted to help farmers keep more of the value of the milk, meat, or crops that they produce, while also encouraging more sustainable models of farming?
Wow, great question. Dairy is really a difficult one too, because so many dairy farms struggle and are going out of business, right? So there's such a strong push for factory style farming for dairies. One of the stories that I tell in the book related to this is about the co-op called CROPP, Crop Co-op. And farmers in the Kickapoo Valley in Wisconsin founded that co-op in the 1980s as an organic value-added co-op designed to save the family farm. So they're best known now for a brand that you guys have probably seen on the grocery store shelves. It's called Organic Valley. And they joined together a small band of misfits, right, in the Kickapoo Valley to pioneer organic dairy and promote perennial grass-fed agriculture for the cows. They were the first organic foods company in the US to have $1 billion in annual revenues. So the model really took off. And in 2019, they had over 2,000 farmer members nationwide. That is shockingly over 14% of all US organic farms were members of the crop co-op. And now we know that perennial grasses are locking in carbon and reducing water pollution, in addition to being better for cow health and healthier for the milk that's being produced. So it's really interesting how they pioneered organic, and then we've discovered through more recent research that the benefits of their farming practices go much further than we even originally realized.
How about land of the lakes? Co-op out your way. Are they performing well?
I don't think they have as strong a commitment to sustainability. It's not an organic co-op, Land O'Lakes. It's definitely a well-known brand. But the thing that's different about the crop co-op is that they were entirely organic from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And the farmers who formed it were very disgruntled with the traditional farmer co-ops. They were not being served by them, and they needed to come up with a new way of doing things. They knew they wanted to cooperate. They wanted to use that model, but they rejected the old way of farming, and they were pioneering something new. And one of the things that they could do as early pioneers was really establish a price for organic milk that was based on what would keep a farmer in business and not drive them to overproduce, as was part of the earlier question, and engage in really unsustainable practices environmentally.
Oh, great, thank you. Another dairy farm related question from Francine, who asks, could we use cooperative models to respond to the decimation of the dairy industry in Vermont and keep that land in agriculture? She says we need to figure out ways to keep land in agricultural use, and newer farmers and younger farmers can't afford those big land areas. So through a co-op model, how could we allow for multiple agricultural enterprises on those properties?
I mean, I think that at this point, if it's dairy, it's worth checking out the crop co-op that I mentioned, because they do have members in the Northeast. So for farms that want to participate in something, stay small, but benefit from having the platform of a large brand, that's probably the way to go. But I have a feeling that this question has more to do with thinking about multiple uses of the land beyond dairy. That's kind of what I was hearing. And I mean, there's so many great land trusts in Vermont. I don't know of examples. I didn't study examples in my book, but I just knew about them anecdotally. That I feel like partnering with the land trusts in Vermont would be a way to figure out a path forward for agricultural, for newer farmers. And there is actually a farm right outside of Norwich that has partnered in that way with a land trust.
Thank you. Rebecca asks a couple of good questions here that kind of tie in together. Rebecca asks, to what extent, if any, is formation of co-ops a regional phenomenon in the US? And why have co-ops escaped some of the stigmatization of communal organization that has eroded our ability to cohere around shared purposes in other spheres? And what strategies have you seen used to build the social trust that would make this kind of co-op formation more common?
Boy, there's a lot packed into that question. In terms of regionally, I think you do have co-ops that appear in ecosystems. So what I mean by that is, if you have a strong governmental support for co-ops, if there's a strong federation that is in a particular region, and there's more of a history of co-ops, it tends to generate more of them. But I don't think it's I don't think that that means you can't develop a new region, so but I think the main point I want to emphasize here is to think in terms of an ecosystem of support. If you're interested in building co-ops, you want to think about how to create a supportive ecosystem where the laws are favorable to the co-op. There are people in the community that want to be members and understand the value of this type of business. And you can develop a sense of support amongst the businesses and where they're actually sharing ideas with one another. So one of the examples that I have in the book is from Western Mass, Real Pickles. And they have a great set of bylaws and articles of incorporation that have really guided their sustainability practices. And a lot of the ideas that they got were for those legal documents were borrowed from their neighboring co-ops that were all part of this ecosystem. So they weren't just coming up with this stuff on their own.
Thank you. Got to unmute myself before I can say anything to you. Thank you. That was a good answer. Let's see. We got time for just a few more questions. Arthur asks. Arthur says experts believe it urgent to reduce fossil fuel emission during the 2020s by 50%. And he asks, how can this best be achieved? By focus on greater efficiency or by increasing alternative energy? And what role can co-ops play, especially in New England, in reducing fossil fuel dependence?
So I think that it's really important to focus on electric utilities for that, to get those big reductions. And it's not efficiency or switching to renewables kind of thing. We need to do both. They go hand in hand. In your personal, if you're talking about personal choices, I think the recommendation is always to make your home as energy efficient as possible, and then try to switch to renewable energy. But when we're talking about the utility scale renewables, I think it's just urgent that we retire fossil fuel based utilities early, and that people are in utilities are investing in that switch to renewables, because without that kind of system-wide switch, it will be really impossible to meet the kind of significant cuts that we have to make in greenhouse gases. In other words, it's wonderful to do things individually, but focusing at the system level is really essential to make this switch. And in New England, I think that, I don't know the breakdown between co-ops versus investor-owned versus public power in New England specifically. So I don't know what kind of dent you can make in New England by just focusing on co-ops. I think probably most important is trying to get all of the utilities across New England to make this kind of switch.
Well, we could convert Green Mountain Power to a co-op. Locally owned. Locally owned. It's possible, but difficult.
Yeah, you heard it here from Gus Speth. So someone organized with this man.
This is actually a great kind of question segue, because Rosemary had asked a question about resident-owned communities and whether that was an area that could be pursued with an eye towards sustainability and as a cooperative model. It sounds like that might be one thing that could come out of that is better efficiency. Let's see. We've got a couple of great comments here as well. Liz says, I've wondered about cooperative farming partnering with residential like co-housing or nursing homes and other communities that offer meals and small local restaurants. And Terry mentions that PCC in Seattle, where I came from, has a farmland trust that allows consumers to participate in the preservation of land for agricultural purposes as well. So
yeah, I love that idea of connecting organic farming to people who are living in co-housing, or I think more of the care settings, where you get a lot of institutionalized food that isn't typically very healthy for you. So that's a great way to link those concepts.
All right, I saved the most divisive question for last. David had to ask it. And I try to moderate these things, but once in a while we get one that slips through. Do you prefer Vermont or Wisconsin cheese?
There's a cheesehead factory right around the corner from my new office that I've been dying to tour, and I'll be political here and say that I prefer the cheese that is in front of me, whatever that happens to be.
A very diplomatic answer. I like it. Well, thank you both, and thanks to everyone who's tuned in this evening. I knew that there would be great questions and great discussion for this event, and I'm grateful to all of you for putting your questions down in the chat. And thank you, Melissa K Scanlan and Gus Speth. We really appreciated hearing from you tonight. I'm coming away from this feeling inspired and interested in wanting to know more. And I hope that other folks in business and in research and agriculture, all sorts of sectors, are too. The book is Prosperity in the Fossil-Free Economy. It is out from Yale University Press with this great cover, which you can also see behind Melissa. You can pick your copy up from us here at the Norwich Bookstore. We'll ship it around the country for you if you are not here in the area, or if you're here locally, we can arrange to have one for you to pick up at the store. And again, your support allows us to keep doing what we're doing and allows Melissa to keep doing what she's doing. And we really appreciate it. Thank you so much to both of you. And to everyone out there watching tonight, thank you. Do good work, be safe, read good books. And we'll see you next time.
Congratulations, Melissa.
Thanks, Gus, for being in conversation, and thanks to the Norwich Bookstore for hosting. And I hope everyone goes and shops at the bookstore.
Thank you so much.